we should be ready to go in just
Just
a
get more.
second. Okay,
Yes.
there we are. We're live. All right. Welcome back, everyone, to the People's Academy for the second unit of Chapter 2 of our curriculum. In the last unit, we covered the fundamentals of the question of imperialism, how it has been theorized, how it evolved, and why it remains central to understanding our struggles to formulating strategies in the present day. Today, we're going to delve deeper into the question of capitalism and imperialism as a destructive force whose system serves to advance capital accumulation, but also produces death on a genocidal scale. To help us understand these dynamics, we are joined by Professor Ali Kadri. Ali Kadri is a professor at Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou, China. He has written extensively on the political economy of war and the development in West Asia. Professor Kadri is the author of several critical books, including A Theory of Forced Labor Migration, The Proletarianization of the West Bank Under Occupation, Arab Development Denied, and of course, The Accumulation of Waste, which I personally consider among the most important contributions to contemporary Marxist thought. Professor Kadri's lecture today will focus on the themes covered in that latter book, whose full title is The Accumulation of Waste, A Political Economy of Genocide and Imperialism. Professor Kadri, it's a great honor to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Yes, I mean, I always start by saying, let's look at the obvious. Let's look at the, what we all experience, what we all see out there, and what we all see is, throughout 500 years of capitalism, we've accumulated many things. We're supposed to accumulate many commodities, and this heap of commodities, the cars, the computers, the televisions, and the pens, and so forth, the commodities, these things that we produce to sell. This is considered, this heap of commodities is the wealth that we've produced, but alongside this wealth, we produced a lot of social and natural waste. We've wasted the lives of many people. We've prematurely extinguished the lives of many people in the process of production, and we prematurely also extinguish nature. And much is talked. What is talked about is that we, nature, the environment is it's the situation is cataclysmic. It's devastating, and so all the reports say that in 50 years' time, it will be difficult to support life as we know it. The physical basis for the support of life will be eroded, and there is a risk also that this devolvement into a lesser quality nature might not occur on an arithmetic scale, sort of 1, 2, 3. It could follow, it could enter into a disequilibrium stage at a certain point in the quantitative progression. Things could go out of hand, nature could go out of hand. This is what it means. And so all of this, when we look at the commodities we produce, the pens and the TVs and cars and so on, we know that social labor and productive labor has gone into the making of things. It takes labor to make things, and everybody agrees with that. I mean, even the neoclassical economists agree with that, but they argue that it's too obvious. What drives the economy is what consumers like. I will not go into this because that's going through the subjective theory of value, but that's what they say. Nobody says that this relationship of producing things requires people to produce things. People produce the machines, and people produce the things that that we consume. But and so if we've produced so much premature death of nature and society, people die way before their time, their historically determined time, because time is qualitative. I mean, we've now developed so many things that we can no longer compare this period of time with the period before. We must compare. I mean, we can't say, in the year 1000 AD, we were living only to 30 years or 20 years of age. Well, the reasons for that were that we had been subject to natural disasters, diseases, and so forth, and famines, crisis of underproduction, because we had so little technology to produce things with. Famines and disease were the reasons why people lived to such short lives. Whereas now, for instance, we know that time is qualitative. That means it's rooted in the social conditions, in the social and material conditions of the day in which we are living now. And at this time, we're supposed to live a much longer life, but we obviously die way shorter than the historically determined potential that other societies, more, not better societies, but more tech advanced societies in the imperialist world experience, like Japan and France and so forth. Whereas in Yemen and other places like that around the world, the life expectancy is somewhat around 50 or 55 years old. And in Afghanistan, I think at one time it was less than 50, it was around 45 years. So we're looking at a lot of premature, and of course, man is also nature. We're not only killing the trees and the oceans and things like that, we're killing people as well, and together we're just destroying things in the process. And this process of destroying things is not haphazard. It's not like it came from nowhere. It came as it is an essential product of production. It's just like we produced the pen. We've also produced the waste, the wasted lives and the wasted nature that are also side products of the pen. In fact, these are and so we've produced things, and the wasted lives and the wasted nature and so forth. And these are products of socially necessary labor times. We had labor involved in their production, and therefore their commodities, and commodities sell. They're priced. When we say a commodity sell, when capital commodifies everything, capital totalizes everything and commodifies everything. When we say capital commodifies everything, that means that everything has a price to it. Some prices we see, some prices we don't see. Some prices are negative, some prices are inbuilt into other prices. For instance, if I had paid $10 for this pen, but the merchant paid only $5 for it, and he profited $5, 10 minus 5 equal 5. Then one asks the question: how did he only pay $5 for the cost of production? Well, to make a profit, because the real cause of the profit is the fact that he paid $5, and $5 is something he negotiated with the direct producers, those people who own the nature upon which the raw material for this thing exists, and the labor that went into the making of this. And so the fact that he paid so little, let's assume that it's so little, $5, it means that the land and the people upon which the labor and the raw material for this pen were found were beaten into submission, were aggressed and they had no more negotiating power to ask for $5. And in fact, if he wants to increase the profit rate by cutting costs, and this is the cost side of the profit, and that's the more important side because it's the production side, then he has to beat the populations and where the labor and the raw materials are found, to basically strip them of their negotiating power so that they have no subjectivity, nothing to negotiate, that they have no sovereignty over their land, they do not master themselves. They're no longer masters of themselves, but I am their masters and I'm their master, and I draw what I want from them. That's the sort of thing that occurs. So that's exploitation. I mean, I'm going to take a lot more from them than I'm going to pay to them, and that's exploitation, and it requires oppression. Naturally, oppression requires doses of actual and ideological violence. You need to ideologically also aggress them, to absorb, to introject the ideology of defeatism, because they have to think that they cannot win against me. That's why I'm going to get everything for cheap. So the fact of the matter is, we live in a world which is, the facts are such, what phenomena, what we experience, what the obvious, what we see is there is much more wasted lives and nature than there are things which are actually of use to society being produced. Why so? Because if we say that the planet is, at least on one side of the coin, the environmental side, if we say that the planet is going to basically go haywire in 50 years' time, that means there is so much environmental death and destruction at the moment that far exceed anything good that we've produced. And that environmental death and destruction is also a commodity that has been produced. It's the product of labor. The death itself is a product of labor. And when we say it commodifies, capital commodifies everything, these are all commodities and they have a price. Prices are not always visible, but the price system is an interrelated structure where the price of everything depends on the price of everything. And prices are either coherent or incoherent in time. I can say the price of oil, it has a spot price and a future price. So it has a price at every point in time. And everything has a price at every point in time. And sometimes the prices of what has, the environmental and the social and the human waste, the wasted humans rather, that we've produced, is a negative price. It's a price that society pays. For instance, the easiest example is if I have trash at home and I want to take out the trash, I'm going to pay $10 for somebody to take the trash out. And so that's negative $10 on my account. So, basically my income, the incomes of society, get reduced by the amount of waste that capital produces. And the profits of capital, as I said, rise by the amount of waste for which capital does not pay. I mean, they polluted the environment. They extinguished the lives of people way before their time, but capital did not pay for these things. Society ends up paying for these things. But these were costs of productions that capital was supposed to pay for, but it did not pay for. Therefore, the profits of capital depend pretty much on how much it wastes, how much it makes society pay for the costs of production. The cost of productions, the production here involved is not only the fact that I have a labor who is going to be reproduced, who's going to get $10 in wages, and he's going to buy bread and butter for his family over the week. That's not only the side of the story that political economy and in the traditional sense, and even neoclassical economics talks about the wage offsets the consumption bundle. What we have here is a process where society ends up paying way more in terms of taxes, in terms of shorter lives because of the pollution that has been produced, shorter lives because of the wars that have been visited upon the masses of the developing world in order to cut costs, the costs of production, and to strip people out of their sovereignty. All of these are sort of negative prices, or quite a liquid price system. I mean, the price system is quite complicated, but in short, society, instead of capital ends up paying for production costs, society ends up paying for the production costs. And the more society pays for the costs of production, the more profits there are for capital, and the more waste capital produces. Let's say if capital, the bosses and the businesses, which are social relations instantiated in persons like the capitalists that we all know, personified in those guys. Now, all of this is a process. It's an auto-destructive process, of course. It's a negative dialectic. It's something that goes from bad to worse all the time, because in order to make more profits exponentially, you will need to destroy more and more and make society pay for the destruction. Now, the point is that also when capital creates many pollutants, for instance, I mean, we're not just saying war is a sort of acts like a major pollutant, because war, what it does is it cuts life abruptly short for the population, because if you have a big war, like the war in Korea, the war in Vietnam, the war on the region here. I mean, in Korea, nearly a quarter of the population, the millions, was lost. In Vietnam, I think 10-15% of the population was lost. In Algeria, again, 10-20% of the population. I don't recall the numbers, but it's the huge numbers. And in the war on terror, some numbers, Iraq war and so on. That's also in the millions as well. So that sort of reduces the population, and it reduces it absolutely, and reduces it relatively, because it reduces the life expectancy as well. Now, pollutants are a sort of slow motion war, because it reduces and it makes society pay, to hospitals and so forth. There's a tax bill that society, which capital has to pay, because it's capital that polluted, in order to pay less for the pen or for the desk or something like that. But then society ends up paying for it. So you can see there's a relationship between profits and what society pays in costs. And what I want to say here is that there is a relationship between the death of nature, because when we make nature sick, it makes man sick. And if it makes man sick, it reduces the life expectancy of man, while actually making capital gain from the sickness it has created, because there's going to be pharmaceuticals and all these things that society is going to pay for. It's dying, and it pays for the costs of its death from what capital has created. And this is so there's a war on the masses, taking place all the time, whether it's an open war like the major wars of the second half of the 20th century and this century, or there is a protracted, slow motion war that is taking place to reduce the social costs of the reproduction of people. You need to pay a lot less to sustain people in a certain living standard, and basically also, if you make new sicknesses, you create new areas into which has to be commodified, which is commodified, and into which money is going to be pumped as well. So you monetize new areas of production as well. In the instance of the exchange. And the story, of course, is this is what actually happens. I mean, it's not like this is we know that we end up paying for diseases, new diseases, and we end up paying for wars. And the disease and the war are constant. And there is somebody the other day who says that at this moment there's something like 70 wars occurring around the world. And if we think about the premature death rate due to austerity and pollution and so on, and that's another. So there's something of a structure of genocide, of slow motion genocide occurring all the time. And there is also, of course, the direct genocide, such as that which occurs in Gaza, which says that we can basically eliminate people at will without concern for the heritage, the gains that the working class made over the last 2 centuries, ever since the rise, the appearance of Marxism on the world stage, and the rise of unions and the rise of progressive forces. So there's a legacy, there's a history of human rights, of gains for labor and so forth, that we are now at a position in history where we're going to write this all off and we're going to forget about it, and we're going to do what is necessary for profit, which is kill outright, like we are doing in Gaza. And by the demonstration effect, if any peoples around the world are going to oppose us, that's what is expected of capital. Capital, it is in its element. That means it makes the most profits when it genocides more and more, either structurally or directly, because in the end, the rate of surplus value is the rate of exploitation, and the rate of exploitation is the rate at which we economize with the life of labor, and that's from volume 3. And the rate at which we economize with the life of labor, and that's just normal reading, that's not an interpretation. How do you economize somebody's life? You make them live a more miserable and shorter life. You basically kill them. So the rate of killing is the rate of profit. And that's what capital, that's what, no one says, basically, in these obvious terms. Now we can say this because, remember, when production relations changed from pre-capitalist to capitalist, and generally it's around 500 years ago, somewhat of a consensus that that we've seen the emergence of wage labor, but there are people who are going to work in workshops and little manufacturers, and instead of them owning their machines, they work for a wage. And we've witnessed this phenomena, the emergence of this phenomena, and that bloomed in the industrial age. And so we said, look, there is a wage system, there are wage laborers, we see them, therefore we can basically ascertain that this is capitalism, that there is capitalism which has a specific phenomena associated, visible phenomena associated with it, and one is wage labor. Now, the same capitalism was said to be progressive, we should not basically reminisce or have nostalgic feelings about going back to the previous times. We should not be romantic and romanticize feudalism or anything prior to feudalism. These were horrific ages. They're class societies, and capitalism has ushered in a liberal thought and free wage labor and so forth. And so it is a progressive stage in history. That's what has been said. But it is until now. What has the balance of power between capital and labor has been such that. And that's because of the new structure of, the structure of imperialism. Imperialism has a lot to do with the fact that things work out this way. What we have is a situation where we can no longer say that this is civilization of progress. Why? Because in first principles, a civilization is what we accumulate in wealth and in things and spiritual production and actual production. And what we've produced is more pollution and death of society and nature. And the structure of thought associated with the production of death of nature and man is a sort of body of art and languages and politics and so on, a superstructure that's basically attuned to the reproduction of the death. So as a civilization, the civilization of capital, it's not Western civilization, Eastern civilization, because the real lines are the class lines, not the national lines, because it's fictitious, or the identity lines. The class lines are the ones we know for sure exist because they're ontological, because a class is about what people do to reproduce, what people do to survive from one day to the next, how do they relate to each other, and how do they relate to others. So it's a social relations of reproduction, it's a social relation to itself, and it's a social relation to other social relations. So a class is determined by relationship to itself in the process of production and the relationship to other classes as well. So class is how I eat. In the end, that's why it exists all the time across history. And somebody eats and somebody controls what the other eats and so on, roughly speaking. So at this level, at this ontological level, at the level of class, we end up, we have a civilization of capital. We have the capital class. Which is the consuming class, and it's consuming because it's consuming. It has this wealth and so on, and this wealth is based on literally the expenditure of life and the life of man and nature, the premature expenditure of the life of man and nature. A sort of cannibalistic order, if I'm going to make profits beforehand, and so the point is that this idea of capitalism being progressive, and we should not sort of reminisce or have nostalgic feelings about the past, it's rather wrong because with if the balance of forces between capital and labor remain the same, it's the idea of prediction. They say, did Marx predict something like that? Was Marx's prediction? I mean, Marx hated predictions in many respects. When he spoke of the rise of socialism, he spoke as a man of revolutionary practice, and he spoke of things for ideological reasons. But Marx, the theoretician, knew otherwise as well. So what we have is a situation where this capitalism is as a civilization of capital, is if the balance of forces remains the same, that means capital is in control of the reproduction of social life. It reproduces social life necessarily. That's not a prediction. That's a law of development, the law of profits, the law of value. All the laws of capital are going to say, if you let me make profits at any expense, and I need to make it at any expense, I need to spill blood and destroy nature, and nature and blood are pretty much the same because that's social nature. Man is also nature. We are like, we're not too different from the trees. And so, but with consciousness, and so we are subjects in nature, but that doesn't make us unnatural. We are still nature. That process of de-development, of reverse development globally, is very scary. You don't need to predict. I mean, there's no prediction. I know the law of development. The law of development says that if I let the capitalists do what they want, then they'll destroy everything. The logic of capital is to basically make, and simply because, also not simply, but there's a precedence of production over consumption. Because we know producers don't know how much money there is out there to buy and how much they should produce exactly. There is no central planning. I mean, they don't have actual vision of what's happening. And they get the messages of production post facto. That means things go to the market and then they get the message and they overproduce. That's why we have a crisis of overproduction, a permanent crisis of overproduction under capitalism for the specific markets for which things are being produced. When we have capital and control, which is the subject in the capital relationship, we are going to have death galore. I mean, writ large, there's going to be more death, more premature death of man, and more premature death. That's the logic of capital. There's not much to predict. What's being predicted is, tell me how strong capital is, how weak is labor, how the international working class is divided. It does not have a revolutionary consciousness. It does not understand that in its solidarity against capital, it will gain more years of life and better years of life. Class is a question of existence, a question what to eat, what to sleep, what to enjoy insofar as the living standard is concerned. That's a class. And so if the workers are not organized and they have absorbed defeatism, introjected defeatism, the crisis, the ideology of capital, then eventually and necessarily, because the law involves necessity rather, but not exclusively, but it will necessarily, but not exclusively, devolve into conditions of poverty, premature death, immiseration, and so forth. And now it involves the death of the planet, the foreseen death of the planet. So in that sense, is capitalism progressive? Can we say, with that danger, that potential of the erasure of the basis for the reproduction of physical life at risk, should we not be a bit more nostalgic about the feudal age? Probably. I mean, even the Middle Ages, because if we're looking at a period in history in relation to the potential it could achieve, in relation to how well everyone around the world could be living and could be, because of the development in the productive forces, and how cheap medicine and food and how abundant things have become. shouldn't we be saying that relative, because times, as I said, are qualitative. We cannot project things onto the past without a huge dose of arbitrariness. But relative to the times, this civilization is disastrous. I mean, we've never seen. I mean, let's say, look at 1000 AD, as I said earlier. Well, the lifespan was something like 25 years old. No matter what they could have done, they would have probably improved the lifespan by a day or two, maybe. Sure, but very little. But now we've noticed that China, for instance, improved its life expectancy from around 33 years in 1949 to nearly 80, a higher level than the United States. So we've seen that this is possible, that a society that manages its resources at the behest of the working class arrives at better conditions. So in that sense, relative to the times, this civilization is disastrous. And if labor continues to be in the shambles as it is now, relative to the strength of capital and so on, then capital will drive the planet to complete the solution. That's the point of things. I mean, so we've basically, the production of waste is basically, necessary. The wasting of life and nature is necessary for profits. And so profits have to grow all the time. We need to waste people and nature more aggressively all along. And as to the question of consciousness, which is sort of a $1 million question, what we have, the difference now is much of the global working class is a sort of is employed by rents to stabilize the political order, and it's also employed by rents that feed on war as a domain of accumulation, on militarism as a domain of accumulation. So all the time we've talked about, we need violence and, ideological aggression to basically destroy people and destroy nature and to make them accept the conditions at which they sell their lives and resources. They're going to exchange their lives for money in order to survive. Now, the point is that, war itself is also a production sphere. War involves waged soldiers' labor, which are going to use machines, and they're going to take down lives. And they're going to take down lives, and so the product is death of man, premature death of man, and so on. And then there is also money being made because there's the war is funded by treasury bills that earn rents and so on. So there is a lot to war as a domain of accumulation, as an industry in itself, and an industry which is the basis of all industries. I mean, it's a feeder industry in the stages of production. If you're going to cut costs, you're going to go and make war somewhere and visit war upon other peoples. The imperialists do that. But the war itself is actually a good business in a sense, because it's going to employ, it's going to make the working class pay for the costs of war. It's not going to empower the working class because they're going to be taxed to pay for the war. It's not going to better the conditions of the working class such that it has more autonomy and so forth. All of this is, when we think of war as a domain of, as an industry of death, then, and we think of how rents to the developing world. I mean, if you think about of the developing world, when we import technology from the West. I mean, we already import labor-saving technology, and there is little wealth to basically stabilize society by employment in arts and culture and so forth, and other services and so on. So there is very little wealth to also create jobs that will stabilize the political and social structure. So what happens is the rents that come in the form of aid, in the form of NGOs and so on from the imperialist centers, what they do is they increase the divisions between either, if it is not the imperialists that are waging war, they're going to send rents to create a sort of militia proletariat in the developing world that's going to be engaged in the act of self-destruction. The process of killing itself, it's going, on the basis of ethnicities, national border lines, whatever, sectarianism, tribalism, all of these things, because these people are going to be there. You've created the conditions, the scarcity, you've drawn resources, there is nothing left, and now you come in with very few dollars, and you pump those dollars with a few guns into these societies, and you basically say, your job now is to produce the death of the other, and the other's job now is to produce your death. And so you have these powder kegs, which are ablaze all over the developing world. And this is a huge industrial project. And it's an industrial project that's also, death is a commodity that is realized, like pollution, it's realized. The whole planet is saying, if we're saying consumption leads production, which is not the case, but let's assume hypothetically that this is the case, that consumption is going to lead production, then what we are consuming globally is a huge amount of pollutants and premature human death. That's the major item of consumption. And of course, the price of it doesn't show, but the price of it is embedded in all the price system that filters and appears in the profit rates, which is, roughly, if there is no under the same distribution conditions, it's roughly the growth rate. The global growth rate adds up to roughly the profit rate, because it's all the new things that have been bought and sold, let us say. So we are in a situation where the planet is the biggest industry in the planet is the industry of death, the death of nature and the death of man. And the creation of bad nature, of sick nature, is like a creation of a machine that kills. Because if you sicken the river, if you throw pollutants in the river and people drink the water, that's going to kill. So the pollutants, the machine that we created, which are the pollutant, and the sick river, sicken people. That in itself, the sickness that capital has created, the machine of death that capital has created, is a sort of machine that capital didn't pay for, but it's acting out what capital wants. It's destroying people's lives. There are too many people for capital here, and there are too many people that are not really useless. They are useful if they engage in an act of self-destruction, either through protracted genocide, structural genocide, or through direct war and direct genocide. And all of this is uh, is the basis of the profit, right? And of course, if we think in terms of the value relation, when we say value, we're saying, that we're not just saying that, there are certain hours of socially necessary labor time which have been objectified in the commodity and they're going to be sold and so on. We're also saying that there is a value is a contradiction between capital and labor, because value is use value and exchange value is what capital is going to gain. Use value is what we are going to gain as a society. So there is a contradiction between use value, and one can go on. It's a bit too murky, but forget about the value now. Just for the time being, we're seeing, that what is we are consuming what is of disuse to us. Uh, we are consuming all the pollutions and all the death globally. We're accepting that. We are acceding to that. We have been acceding to that over the 20th century. I mean, it's a century of death, of mega death. 500 million people died in wars and so on. So this is stuff that we consume and we pay for. And of course, it doesn't look, if I go to the store and I pay $10 for this pen, I'm not going to look at my $10 registers here hypothetically at the cash machine, but it also the $10 symbolizes all the reduction in the social cost of the reproduction of labor, or the death and disease and the wars and all the stages of production, all the people that have been, and the nature that has been shortchanged in the process of production. How was it shortchanged? It's the life of nature and the life of man have been cut short and this is in the $10 that I have paid. It's $10. It's in there. It's in the power structure of the superstructure that says this is a value, but it's only of $10. It has equated the $10 with this total value that has emerged in the span throughout the process of production. Now, as you can see, the point of the matter here is that the real cost of the pen, if we were going to tally the real cost of the pen, had the people that throughout the stages of production that are before we arrived at the pen, being powerful enough to argue for higher wages, better lesser pollutants, better living conditions, and so forth, that price wouldn't have been $10. It would have been probably much more. But at least the price would have reflected the social benefits, not the social costs that have accrued to other societies and so forth. But that's so. As you can see, we are in a process of complete waste, wasting lives, wasting nature, and waste cell. We consume the waste, and it's a process of auto waste. It's a very I'm just being descriptive. I scratched the surface of theory when I talked about the value relations, and the value relation is a relationship also between capital and labor, between use value and exchange value. Capital wants to appropriate the money. It doesn't want to sell things because they're of benefit to society. It just produces a commodity because a commodity is meant for sale. Now, as you can see, uh, in a global order that is based on, I want to sell at any cost, and if I cause more damage to nature and man, I sell more. I not only sell the pen, I sell the death that is related to the making of the pen. And if I destroyed trees and nature and so forth in the process, the trees that I destroyed are also making me profits because they are an industry in their own rights. And if I make a war to cut costs for the making of this pen, it's an industry in its own right. And what I do insofar as the value relation, because it's subject-object, the value relation has a subject, which is either capital or labor, a subject depending on the balance of power. If capital is stronger, its exchange value is way stronger than use value, then what we're going to have is a situation where uh, 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 death is far more beneficial to capital, to sell for capital, because it basically erodes and destroys the very bases that create an autonomy of the working class. And which brings me, to the idea of the rents, the rents that, the foreign aid and the NGOs and all the ideological production uh, of capitalism, the human rights of capitalism and so forth, all this language is meant to basically to destroy man and nature in order to ensure profits. And that's, I think has it been long enough? Have I talked long enough? Or?
Well, we could do much longer, but we are coming close to the hour. Professor Ali Kadri, listening to you, I was reminded of this story that emerged just after Donald Trump launched his wave of tariffs against the entire world and chiefly China, where one of the capitalist newspapers, I think Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal, calculated that if an iPhone, it's an example we often like to use when talking about exploitation. If an iPhone was made from start to finish in the United States, it would cost $56,000 and not $1,000. And of course, even liberals would admit that we pay $1,000 in the United States for an iPhone because a child in the Congo mines cobalt for $2 a day. And so there's a general acknowledgement of exploitation, but there isn't, as you say, or much more rarely do we talk about the fact that before there was exploitation, the people had to be beaten into submission again and again. Patrice
Yes,
Lumumba had to be killed. The movements
yes,
had to be exterminated. The will for mass politics had to be disabled through NGOs. Debt had to be imposed, structural adjustment had to be imposed, and even today you have proxy warfare waged by, militia funded by the West against the people of Congo to sustain what are really catastrophic conditions for ordinary people. And that points to a direction of class struggle. And if you allow me to maybe grossly paraphrase an argument that you make at several points in the book, is that the task, especially when you're organizing in the global north, is not to ensure that there are higher wages or shorter work weeks for your workers, but to make sure that those higher wages and shorter work weeks in the north don't mean shorter lives in the south. And I think that gives
oh,
us a very powerful orientation for our internationalism and our solidarities. Professor Ali Kadri,
yeah.
thank you again so much for joining us. Um, in 2 weeks' time, we will return with Unit 3 of this course on the national question, where we'll explore the question of, what is the exercise of sovereignty within the state, and how does the national struggle relate to the international struggle. So once again, Professor, thank you so much. It was an honor to have you on the People's Academy, and everyone else, please look out for the following lecture in 2 weeks' time. I'm going to stop the stream now.